Good evening. I'd like to call the Board of Education meeting for Wednesday, July 8th, 2020 to order at 6:01 PM. Can I have a roll call, please, Mrs. Olszewski?
Mrs. Evans?
Here.
Mrs. Witkowski?
Here.
Mr. Alexandrovich?
Here.
Mr. Lewis?
Here.
Mr. Gamble?
Here.
Mr. Sprague?
Here.
And Mrs. Larson is excused.
Thank you. The meeting has been properly posted. Please rise and join us for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Item 3 is approval of the agenda. Do I hear a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Motion by Mrs. Witkowski. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Lewis. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Item 4 is community comment. Is there anyone who would like to make community comment? Okay, hi. Please, one at a time, come to the microphone, state your name and address for the record.
Hello.
Hi.
My name is Ann Swirsky. Address is 7851 West Canterbury Court here in Franklin. Good to see you all again.
You too.
Since I was at a meeting. I wanted to say a couple things tonight. I did bring some notes just because I have a lot of thoughts, but I'll be fast. First of all, thank you for what you've all done for our students since March 13th. You had to turn everything that you knew on your head and start kind of all over, and for the most part it worked. I mean, there's obviously things that can be improved, but it was good. All three of my kids had a pretty decent experience with the virtual learning, so I appreciate that. I think that in this room, everyone would agree that nothing is more important, maybe secondary to test scores and achievement and students' education, nothing is more important than our students' safety. I absolutely support getting our kids back to school. I really, I'm grateful for the virtual learning. I'm grateful that we have the resources to do it again when we need to this coming year. But I fully support getting our kids back to school. They need it for their social, mental, emotional well-being, as well as for their education. But the one part of the parent survey that I saw that I just had a concern about was under fall reopening theme number 2. It said, and I'll quote, "Overall, the community is deeply divided on mask wearing. There was no community consensus related to mask wearing during the school day." That concerned me because I don't think it should matter if there is community consensus. The job, your job is not to find community consensus. It is to keep our students safe while providing the education that the students need and deserve. Actually, if you look at your school board policy number 5460, school safety, it says, and I quote, "It is the policy of the Franklin Public School District that all students and staff have the unqualified right to attend schools which are safe and secure. Providing a safe educational environment is the most important priority of the district." So what we've learned is that the only way to really prevent COVID or reduce the transmission is keep people home and people wearing masks in public places. Washing your hands is great, keeping our 6 feet of distance is great, but the only way that we can really slow transmission or prevent transmission of the disease is by wearing masks. I want the students to get back to school, but in order to follow your own policy, the safety and students of our staff must remain the most important priority, more important than any community consensus. The CDC, WHO, AAP all recommend masks in public places, especially when physical distancing, social distancing can't be guaranteed. Locally, the Franklin Health Department states, and I quote from the director of the health department, "Current recommendation is for individuals that are physically and medically able to wear a mask in public when physical distancing cannot be maintained or guaranteed." If you open the schools to full capacity in September, I don't believe you can guarantee physical distancing at all times. As you make the decisions about the reopening of our schools, I urge you to trust the experts and remember that, again, the most important priority of Franklin Public Schools is the safety of your students and your staff, not just the consensus of the community. Franklin Public Schools cannot be a better place to learn, a better place to work, or part of a better community unless it is safe. And the only way to guarantee that students and staff will be safe is to require masks for everyone in every school building. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other comment?
Hi. Hi, good evening. My name is Tom Best. I live at 8400 West Elm Court. And thank you. I'm grateful for the opportunity to talk to you today. And I'm also grateful to have listened to that great comment previously, much of which I agree with, some of which I don't. I wanted to be here to add some comments and some emphasis to, and I'm sure many others would like to be here to add some emphasis to their responses to their survey. And I very much appreciate the opportunity to fill out that survey well in advance of the fall. So in particular, I want to talk about some drawbacks of virtual learning that maybe weren't mentioned in the May meeting the recording which I saw, but I'm certain are on the minds of many of you as you've been thinking about this. I just wanted to add my emphasis to them. Even though that I believe the district is planning to reopen in some extent, as was alluded in person, as much as possible, and I know we're all preparing for scenarios that will pressure us to draw back and go more into virtual learning, especially, if there are additional spikes, et cetera. And I want to bring these things up now. I think we all need to take this opportunity now when we're not, say, in a crisis locally, as is happening in other states, to think very carefully and plan very carefully about what to do if and when we are. So my main point is, despite wanting very much to be, in many cases, most parents and guardians cannot be good teachers for their children. They are not trained to be. They don't have the time to train to be in a short time frame because they're juggling educating their child. I should have also added, I also have 3 kids of my own that are rather young, but in the district. They cannot juggle educating their children and providing for their families. These are very difficult things to grapple between. This comes from my own personal experience, but also from just discussions with my local community. I'm sure we can all think of such discussions. And as a result, especially for those children, and there are some who can and some who cannot, as we all know, who do not independently participate fully in virtual learning, be it for behavioral, technological, developmental, socioeconomic, many different reasons, add up and accumulate and relate to each other. Virtual learning results in a loss of critical educational opportunity that will set them back for the rest of their lives in different ways with different kids. And we have to weigh the consequences for the younger generations of virtual learning with the consequences for adult generations of in-person school exposure. And we have to think very carefully of clever ways to keep kids in school in person, in my opinion, as long as possible. I think there are many Franklin community parents and guardians who would welcome the opportunity to volunteer in creative ways to support as much as possible, ensuring that their kids can get a quality education in person. I think there's a lot of ideas that could be floated about for that. And one thing in conclusion, and yes, there is only a little bit of research on COVID and science out there on COVID and everything related to it, but we have decades of research and experience about why absence or lack of participation in school doesn't help a student for the rest of their lives. And for many parents and families, virtual learning can be akin to absence from school, and perhaps then trying to make things up, doing homework at odd hours of the night, etc. So, again, I want to thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much. Is there any other community comment this evening? Any other comment? Thank you all very much for your comments. Okay, now I'll move on to item 5, consent agenda. Would any board member like to remove an item from the consent agenda? Hearing none, do I hear a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Gamble, is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Sprague. All those in favor of the consent agenda say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Item 6, school board announcements. Are there any announcements? Hearing none. Item 7, school board calendar. 7A, we have a regular Board of Education meeting here, Wednesday, August 19th, 2020, at 5:30 PM. And that will be followed by the annual meeting of the electors on Wednesday, August 19th, 2020, here at the Education and Community Center at 6 o'clock PM. We also have a regular Board of Education meeting Wednesday, September 9th, 2020, here at the ECC at 6 o'clock PM. Item 8, District Administrator Update. Dr. Miller.
Well, our attention most certainly has been on our planning for return to school. Tonight, we're looking forward to sharing that information with you. We will then be following up with our staff and our families by the end of this week with all of the information that you'll hear this evening. So we're proud of the work that we've done so far, and we're looking forward to sharing that and hearing from you this evening. You'll also hear tonight more information about our budget. The budget that we have is a very good budget. But I would ask that you keep in mind that while the budget will remain the same, we'll have to be very flexible in terms of our how we expend the dollars based on our needs related to COVID and the work that we need to do to provide the support so that our children can be safe in our schools. So just asking you to keep that in mind. So again, my update is really mostly embedded in the presentation here tonight that you'll hear.
Any questions from the board members? Thank you, Dr. Miller. Item 9, reports, presentations, and other school board business. 9A, our annual academic standards adoptions. Dr. Reuter.
Thank you. It must be July. We come before you each year with our annual standards adoption for our academic standards for the 2021 school year. You'll find in front of you an amended annual notice document that articulates the adoption of social studies standards. Previously, it was related as geography and history, and the social studies standards are developed through 5 core tenets of social studies. So I wanted to be explicit that it was all the tenets of social studies, which are linked in the annual notice and your board report for this evening. So I've outlined all of the standards that we use in all academic areas, starting in 4K all the way through 12th grade, as well as the essential element standards we used for students that have been identified for that standard base that take the DLM as a standardized assessment in our special education program. So with that, I'll answer any questions that you have, and I'm just looking tonight for a motion to approve these standards for our upcoming school year.
As always, some of these standards are so old, and it takes years to develop new standards. Have you heard any chatter about with a new state superintendent coming up that any of them might be reviewed? I know we have some new ones,
Yeah.
but that any might be reviewed faster?
I think right now, from my understanding, the work that's been done in the last 2 years, the standards for literacy in Wisconsin, the standards for physical education, art, financial literacy standards are new within the last 3 years. As you guys know, you approved the graduation requirement at the high school level. Those standard and social studies have all been revised within the last 3 to 4 years. Those are some pretty hardcore areas. And the science standards were revised 4 years ago as well. So I have not heard what is on pace for future revision, as most of them have been reviewed in the last 3 to 4 years. And when review of standards takes place at the state level, it's from engagement across all CISAs with administration, teacher representation. If you click on any of these standard links, they'll bring you to the Department of Public Instruction's website, which articulates the standards. And then you click on a PDF, which opens, in some cases, 100+ pages of literature that relates to who developed these standards, reviewed them, the research base, and then the actual application of how this should look and feel within the classrooms. And these are a basis for us as we work through curriculum reviews of these are the standards that we set as a baseline, and then we want to exceed those experiences with the instructional programming that you adopt through our review cycles. So thinking about the science standards that you reviewed, you approved our science programming for this coming fall. We're knee-deep, actually chin-deep, in the work around developing that curriculum and aligning standards, which will give an experience for kids that exceed those standards.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other comments or questions before we have a motion? Otherwise, I'm looking for a motion to approve the 2020-21 annual academic standards.
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Sprague, is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Gamble. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Dr. Reuter.
Thank you.
Item 9B, the 2020-21 budget draft number 1 approval. Mr. Milzer.
Yes, at the last meeting, we had the budget handed out. You had some time to get familiar with it. Again, this is the preliminary budget that gets us started for the year. Almost everything in this budget is estimated. Since we received your questions, we've answered all of those. And this budget moves us forward with our district initiatives. It includes estimated funds to deal with the expenditures due to COVID. It includes the staffing plan we discussed earlier with that report in May. It has a projected tax increase of about 1% or about $10 per $100,000 of assessed value. And again, the adoption of the budget now kind of gets us started for the year, and in October we'll come back with a revised budget based on the number of students we have, the amount of state aid we'd be receiving, as well as any other changes in what we're doing. Probably more changes this year due to COVID in our planning than we've had in the past. But again, that moves resources around. It doesn't make the budget any larger than it is. So we'd be looking for adoption of the budget as it appears on page 13 of the presentation. That's the summary format.
Thank you. So I'm looking for a motion to approve the 2020-21 budget draft number 1. Do I hear that motion?
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Gamble, is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Alexandrovich. Do we have any discussion or comments on the motion?
Yes, Jim, I still, this budget does include a significant increase in equalization aid, correct?
Yes.
$1 million, 1.2 million.
Right.
What essentially drives that? A formula? What thing in the formula?
Yeah, it's an extremely long formula, but for this year, the driving factor would really be our additional number of 4K students, because the equalization aid formula is based on things that happened in 2019-20 school year. So we had additional students which go into that formula, and the formula essentially looks at what is the value, equalized value of Franklin, and then what is the value per student. So when we add 188 students or so to that, the amount of value in Franklin per student goes down, which makes Franklin look poorer in the eyes of the state, and we receive more aid than we otherwise would have. So
Okay.
that we expected it to go up, and it went up actually more than we thought it would, and that number, I still tried to be a bit conservative with that number based on what's going on with state government.
And as far as what's going on in state government, so the current budget does allow for an additional increase of $179 per pupil, which is not included in this budget.
Not included, right.
Okay, so it could go up, how much more? Another 900,000?
Yeah, I believe that was the number.
Okay, thanks for the explanation. It wasn't clear to me in the previous information.
Yeah, and I didn't quite understand your question, if that's what you
I
were looking
understand.
for.
This budget does include, though, an increase in debt service levy of $970,000, is that correct?
It does include the increase. Mhm.
I understand that it's due to a refunding of how much? The entire debt that we have, or?
It would be of that amount. There's two things going on. One would be a refinancing of pretty much our entire debt,
Okay,
which can't be done until November timeframe based on legal requirements. So we have to wait and see if the rates at that point will be just as favorable as they are now, or they were in May when we took a look at it. That refinancing would save us about $1.3 million over 13 years, based on what rates were in May. And the other piece of it is,
just a quick question on the $1.3 million savings. Is that a net present value, or is that just a straight dollar amount?
it's a straight dollar amount.
Okay, so it's really it's less than that in today's dollars.
In today's dollars, I could tell you what it is, maybe a couple $100,000 less, maybe $200,000 less, something like that.
What inflation are you assuming? Or what is your factor?
I would have to look I didn't create the numbers myself.
Mm-hmm.
It was done for us by a consultant, so I'd have to take a look at that.
I understand. I guess I just don't understand you're increasing levy, $970,000, which will never come off the base. Once it's levied, it will always be in the base.
No,
Taxpayers will never,
it could be lowered after that.
it would be lowered in debt service, but it would not be lowered for any taxpayers.
Yes, it would.
In what way?
The debt service levy, we need to levy what we have for our current payments, and we can levy additional to reduce future payments. So we're levying additional to reduce future interest costs to the taxpayers. That's what that money is in there for. After this year, we would no longer be doing that, so that amount just drops off. There is no base that it gets added to.
But it's part of the formula, the aid formula, the levy limit formula.
No, not for referendum-approved debt. It's not part of that.
I think I'll have to have a little conversation with you about how that works, but I
Okay.
guess, so this budget is tentative, it can be changed every cycle, every time it comes before us, correct?
It could be. Your next big time to look at it is October. It'll be essentially the same budget for the annual meeting, except that we'll have actual numbers in there instead of budget for last year. And then we really redo the entire budget because we've made so many assumptions on the new staff we have, the benefits they might choose, the number of students, and then exactly what we're doing in the district, which will change. So things will move around, and it will come back as a finalized budget in October,
But when do we get state numbers?
October 15th.
So can levy be changed in October?
Yes.
Okay, because I do not support the additional levy for debt service. So I will vote yes for it at this point, but I would probably be proposing an amendment to remove that if it still is in there in the end.
Yeah, and we would have to look at what the tax picture looks like at that point. That's kind of the point of waiting till October to do that, like you're talking about. We would have a much better idea from the state on the amount of money they're going to give us, or not. If the amount they're giving us drops, then the tax levy goes up automatically because of the revenue limits. And then we would definitely want to reduce that amount.
I'm just telling what my position is at this point in time.
Mhm.
So, and I understand there's a risk factor in this budget, is state aids, so
Mhm.
we'll see what it is at that point.
Sure.
Any other discussion? Okay. Hearing none, can we have a roll call, please?
Mrs. Witkowski,
Aye.
Mr. Alexandrovich,
Aye.
Mr. Lewis,
Aye.
Mr. Gamble,
Aye.
Mr. Sprague,
Aye.
Mrs. Evans.
Aye. So the motion carries 6-0, one absent. Thank you for your work on the budget. Thank you. Okay, we move on to item 9C, the 2020-21 back-to-school planning update. Dr. Miller and Dr. Cohen.
Okay, could start the projector. First, I'm not blinded. I'll get out of the way shortly. Apparently, it's warming up. Can you turn off that light? All right, very good. In order to understand where we are today and our plans for the future, we need to understand why we're here. A worldwide pandemic, unlike any other we've experienced in our lifetimes, has impacted all of us. Our students have become at-home learners who've been isolated from their peers and the social interactions that are critical to their development. As we track the spread of COVID-19, we learn more every day. In the most recent publication of the American Academy of Pediatrics, it is advised that we have students physically present in school this fall. Next slide. As we plan for how we will return to school, we are focused on the following priorities. First and foremost, we need to maximize the safety and well-being of staff and students. We must allocate the resources and talents we have to ensure a highly productive and effective learning program for all. And throughout the duration of this pandemic, we must keep our planning flexible and responsive to the needs of our students and our community. As we present this plan today, there are still a number of decisions that need to be made. There are teams of people who are working on an enormous number of details who are not present here to answer all of your questions. Following our presentation, the directors and I will answer the questions we can, and if we're unable to answer your question tonight, we'll answer it as soon as possible. At this time, Dr. Cohn, our Director of Strategic Leadership, along with the other directors and myself, will share with you our Reopening Doors 2020 plan. Dr. Cohn?
Good evening, everybody. Just some logistical pieces as we kind of dive in here this evening. We'd ask that the board hold your questions till the end tonight so that we can present all the information to you, and then certainly all of us will be available to be responsive to further questions you have as you want to kind of dig in. The second logistical piece is I would like to take a moment just to introduce Molly Call and Lori O'Neill, our district nurses. They're here this evening as well. And so as we start to get into some of the potential medical questions here related to some of these pieces, they'll be available to answer your questions as well. So there are a number of us here that'll be able to support tonight, and we're hopeful that we can address most of what you might be asking. So I wanted to start tonight by talking a little bit about what we've learned. Certainly, we've been thinking about the start of school since March and the initial closure of school. We certainly had to attend to some immediate needs, but there was also a need for us to think to the future and in terms of what not only the next couple of months of spring were going to look like, but thinking about the fall. I've had the opportunity to have a number of planning conversations over the last couple of months with our own staff, our community, our students. And in those conversations, a couple of things became incredibly evident. One, whenever you have a conversation about kind of the current state and opening in fall, those conversations become incredibly personal. I think everybody is affected by this pandemic and views the perspective of schooling in the fall through that lens of their situation, their children, their family members. Every single just about conversation I've had has led back to some sort of anecdote or example of a person connected to the individual I was talking to or their own experiences. I think it's really important we keep that in mind when we're talking about planning, right? At the end of the day, we all want what's best for our staff, our students, our families, our community. But we need to recognize that people have deep and personal feelings about this work, and we have to acknowledge, honor, and recognize that as we're discussing our decisions. The second is there are very many decisions to make, right, in terms of daily operation, of opening school, some big, some small. And within those decisions that we have to make, not every decision we make is going to align with every perspective or point of view. And so we look at the most up-to-date information, we look at current information from a variety of sources, we listen to our community, we listen to our staff, we listen to our students, we listen to the medical professionals and the guidance of what's happening and how to move forward, and then we make the best decisions possible. From there, we learn from that, we make adjustments when we need to, but not everyone's point of view is going to be reflected in those decisions. And so we just need to acknowledge and recognize that as well. So what you see here are the areas of our planning that we felt were most important to kind of begin with from a 10,000-foot view. And as we thought about a return to school in fall, we really were looking at 4 different potential scenarios, all of which we needed to provide some degree of planning for. One was a complete in-person return to school where students are face-to-face with their instructor, as we would think of school traditionally. The second is that in-person scenario, but with numbers of students out sporadically for varying periods of time, right? If I typically have a classroom of 22 students, 25 students, 28 students, at any one time, kind of given the progression of the illness and family circumstance, there may be 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 students that are out for varying lengths of time, and we need to be able to support their learning. The third scenario is a scenario in which the health department quarantines and shuts down either a full class of students and a teacher, a full grade level of students and teachers, or even an entire building due to a continued outbreak or spread of the virus and a need to quarantine for a period of time. And so in that case, we need to be able to flexibly and rapidly shift to a virtual environment to support learning in that circumstance. And then the fourth scenario is if we're going to engage in a face-to-face or in-person return to school in fall, we know that there are medically vulnerable students and families that may not be able to attend. And so we need to provide virtual instruction and support to those families through our Homebound program. And so those were the scenarios with which we started to draft and develop a plan related to instruction in the fall. And I think you're going to see that reflected in the things we're going to talk about tonight. So certainly there were a number of planning resources that supported our work and continue to support our work. We have ongoing and regular conversations with our Franklin Health Department in discussing kind of the current state of the pandemic here in Franklin, Milwaukee County, the state. Additionally, there are a number of federal and state resources that have been available to us. You heard Dr. Miller already reference the American Academy of Pediatrics. We certainly have the CDC, we have the Department of Public Instruction, we have our WIAA who provides guidelines around athletics. We have our own staff, nurses, parents, the broader Franklin community, and then certainly we're in touch with our neighboring districts to hear from them about what they're planning and doing. So one of the things that was important to us as we engaged in some of this work was to not get kind of too far down the road until we had an opportunity to hear from our community. Certainly we serve the community, and so it's important for us to not only be able to reflect on how virtual learning went when we had to kind of rapidly shift to that environment in March, in order to think about a return to virtual in fall and how that might influence us to improve that programming, but also to hear from them about the fall and an in-person return and what that might look like and what's most important to our community members. That's not the sole information with which we're going to make decisions, but certainly it has to help contribute to the pool of information that we consider as we make decisions about the fall. And so every board member through board docs should have the complete report of the survey, and so I'm not going to get deep into that information. I did want to highlight just a couple of pieces here as we have this conversation. So the first question we asked the majority of our families on the survey was about their experiences in the spring and that rapid shift and transition over to a virtual environment. What you're going to see, and what I hope you saw, was for the most part, there's some pretty good support and levels of satisfaction around that shift, and particularly the areas here that were most important to us in terms of what that looked like. And then you're also going to see there are some fairly high percentages in that somewhat satisfied category. Luckily, in both the somewhat satisfied category and not at all satisfied category, we received a number of very helpful comments that will help us and did help us in our planning and reflection on how that experience went. Additionally, it was important to us to ask if that programming, in the opinion of our families, improved over time. And so what you see here is about 40% of our families said they did feel that programming improved as time went on, 44% who somewhat agreed, and 16% who disagreed. And so that tells us that we were at least being responsive to the things we were seeing and working to improve the program throughout those couple of months. And then lastly, we wanted our families and our communities to tell us, or our community to tell us about their overall satisfaction level in terms of how effective the programming was from their point of view. And you can see the numbers here. And so while that gave us some information, it was important then to dig into the comments. I think you saw we had over 2,800 responses on the survey. We had over 3,000 comments. I read every single comment, and we spent time kind of looking through those comments, categorizing them, processing through them, thinking about them, and then kind of getting them where we needed to in terms of what were the themes that were coming out of those comments from our community. And so what you're going to see here are the three themes that were most evident when it came to virtual learning. The first, that there was a demand, a need to revert back to a more traditional schedule. Lots and lots of comments related to kind of that model of posting resources and then allowing families throughout the day to kind of engage at a time that worked best for them. There were a number of comments supporting, no, you know what, 9 to 9:50 needs to be literacy time, and we would like the teacher to be providing that instruction and facilitating that instruction in more of a live, synchronous manner. And so that came up frequently within the survey. The second theme was that instruction at the elementary level needed to include all subjects. While there was some level of appreciation for us narrowing, because we needed to, right, that focus to literacy and math, there's a desire, I think, to get back to a full scope of instruction. And then lastly, there were a number of comments about the desire to increase consistency between classes. A lot of comments about communication. Some teachers, particularly at the high school level, there were references in middle about being highly responsive versus less responsive. Teachers that were kind of communicating in one mode versus another teacher that's communicating in another mode. Or at the high school level, a variety of different platforms from kind of Google Drive or Google Doc to Google Classroom to other ways that teachers were providing work to students. And so that desire to create more continuity, I think, was evident. Within the full report, you're going to see a variety of comments that kind of supported those themes. I included some here that I felt were most representative, but I won't necessarily dig deeper into those unless you have questions later. The second portion of the survey related to our return to school in the fall. And the survey was designed in a way where we were making the assumption we were returning to an in-person environment. And so you didn't see a question on the survey that asked, do you want to return to an in-person environment? Because we were assuming that that was going to occur. However, our families did provide a number of detailed comments about their desire to return or not return and some rationale as to why that I'll highlight in a little bit. We took some elements of safety, the heavy hitters from the guidelines that we've been reading and from our work with the county and with our district nurses in terms of where we wanted to get some feedback from the community about how important are these pieces, right? How important are these elements to you and your family, your child feeling secure or more safe or better about returning to school in the fall? And so you're going to see a variety of things here. I tried to highlight for you where there was some maybe larger areas of agreement around importance, and also some areas where there was more division. What you're going to see here are some areas, I think, of deep agreement, right? Increased frequency of required hand washing, increased frequency of learning space disinfecting. Generally, there was a consensus that those are important. Areas such as mask wearing or eating lunch in the classroom, there was more division. And while that in itself doesn't drive our decision, I think it's something we just need to be aware of, right? And we need to be able to communicate around. And so you can see that breakdown here. In terms of eating lunch in the classroom, there were many, many comments to kind of support, especially these yellow areas. This is where the most comments were. Around eating lunch in the classroom, the majority of comments related to that were concerned about allergies, right? So the idea that if we typically have an allergy-free classroom environment, if we're going to now eat in that space, we're exposing students to allergies. Some additional areas here, the flexible schedule question that consists of some in-person and some virtual. You're going to see that one of the themes from the survey here was kind of a universal opposition to that in the comments. Lots and lots of comments from families about daycare concerns, concern about going back to work and what it means if my child's home 2 days a week, those kinds of things. Staggered arrival and dismissal, a number of comments there about bus ridership versus not, and thinking through, like, what does that really mean and what does that look like, and maybe just not enough detail there to have people wrap their head around that particular one. Reduction or elimination of in-person gatherings, most of the comments there related to athletics and activities, and not necessarily some of the things that were listed here. So we'll clarify and talk about that a little bit more tonight. And so as we did with the first part of the survey, we were able to break into some themes. Theme 1, the majority of comments supported a full and consistent 5-day-a-week return to school over a schedule that mixes virtual and in-person instruction. Even parents who were advocating for a fully virtual option seemed to be advocating for a 5-day consistent virtual option versus a staggered option. There were a handful of comments that supported a staggered option, but the majority of comments did not. Theme 2, overall, the community is deeply divided on mask wearing. Again, I wanted to just build awareness there, right? It was a theme, many, many comments about masks. I thought it was important that we at least acknowledge and talk about that. And then third, strong desire to return to in-person instruction, but also providing a virtual option for families that need it. Again, many, many comments about, we know that schools function best when kids are in school. We want our children to return. We want them to do it safely. But we also recognize that that's not going to work for some families, and so how are we going to support those families that have medically vulnerable students or family members to ensure that they're also receiving an equitable education? And again, some of the comments, more details in the report, but again, I pulled some that I felt were representative of the thought processes. And so with that as background, let's transition to thinking about the fall. The plan is really grounded in the 3 areas that you heard Dr. Miller kick off at the top, and I wanted to highlight those as we kind of get into some of these pieces. The first is, under ensuring a highly effective learning program for all, our intention is to return to a full 5-day-a-week in-person instructional program. That's the bulk of what our planning is focused on. That's our intention. That's how we'd like to move forward. At the same time, we've built in and will continue to build in virtual programming to medically vulnerable and quarantined students and families. We recognize that there are times where students will just not, through no fault of their own, be able to attend. We need to support those families instructionally. And additionally, and this came through in the survey, we need to increase support for the social and emotional needs of our students and staff. Right? We recognize that our students have gone through a number of transitions over the last couple of months, as we all have. We need to make sure that their reentry is safe and supportive. Our second high-level category is the safety and well-being of students and staff. Our intention is to put protocols in place that will keep our students and staff as safe and healthy as possible and keep our school buildings open as long as possible. And so we feel that with the right protocols, we can make that a reality. And then finally, we want to be flexible and responsive. In the event that an individual classroom, grade level, or an entire building needs to shift rapidly to a virtual environment, we need to be prepared to do that and do it well. And then we also need to be agile enough to adjust to new information as it comes in, right? It's important to really emphasize that what you're hearing tonight is where we're starting right now, and that as new information comes over the next month and a half to 2 months, we will adjust accordingly. And so with that, let's get into some of the details. We wanted to start by talking a little bit about some of the universal precautions that we're planning to put in place to support an in-person return to school 5 days a week. Some of these I think will sound obvious, some I'll spend a little more time detailing, but I want to start with fundamentally our approach to cleaning, disinfecting. We're going to change our protocols and ramp up our specific deep cleaning areas within our schools. We're going to increase daily protocols and weekly protocols that emphasize kind of sanitation in high traffic areas, making sure that we're cleaning between transitions, and that overall we're making sure that we have a disinfected and safe space. Also, we're putting protocols in place to teach, support, emphasize, and reinforce hand washing and hand sanitizing in all of our classrooms. We're going to utilize modified entry and exit, as well as modified movement patterns, in order to make sure that we don't have large gatherings of students in similar spaces at similar times. And so some ways that might look is, for example, in a particular school, we're going to be utilizing more entrances than we've used in the past at the beginning and end of a school day, or exits. And so we will have assigned, perhaps, entries and exits. We will have students kind of separated into those spaces, again, to reduce numbers. In buildings, we're going to limit movement when we can, and we're going to identify hallway patterns that are going to allow for the reduction of kind of mass gathering. Additionally, if you think of like the high school, the main commons, for example, we're not going to allow large group gathering in that space at the beginning, end of school day, or during passing times, again, to minimize spread, potential spread. As we've heard tonight, and as we've referenced a little bit already, we know that face coverings are top of mind for many of our community members. Our plans at present are to require masks or face shields for all staff, and that we would identify some specific protocols for when and where they can be removed. Additionally, we know that there are periods of the day where we will be requiring student face coverings. That said, we want to wait until we get closer to the start of the school year before we identify those specific protocols to make sure that they're reasonable, appropriate, and meeting the needs of our students and school and community. And so we're going to wait till we have the most up-to-date information before we make a final decision on the protocols related to that. Finally, in the classroom, we're planning to limit communal supplies, and we're going to focus on individual supplies as much as possible. Some additional universal precautions. We're going to scale significantly back on the number of non-essential visitors and volunteers in our buildings. We want to make sure that our staff are present and our students are present, and then we will identify specific protocols and circumstances under which others may enter the building. Additionally, now through November 1st, any typical back-to-school events, PTO, PTA events, foundation events, will be held virtually or canceled in order to prevent large gatherings of community staff and students. We'll be working to modify our absence protocols in order to adjust and accommodate a higher volume of student absence. We know that we need to code and think about things differently, given the realities of student illness potentially related to the virus. For a drinking water perspective, we're going to ask that our families and students provide personal water bottles, or we will provide one-use cups rather than using drinking fountains kind of as they are designed initially. We're going to provide, in addition to our health rooms, isolation spaces in every one of our schools that will allow for students who are showing one or more symptoms of COVID-19 to be isolated from other students who may be down in the health room due to a scrape, a fall, or another reason. We're going to increase and overly communicate our protocols for health monitoring and quarantine. It's really important here that we work as partners side by side with our parents and our community to make sure that we're monitoring the health of children and that we're keeping children who are sick home so that they're not coming to school. And so we'll continue to reemphasize what to look for as a parent and under what circumstances they should be keeping their child home. We're going to do that through systematic communication. One of the things you're going to hear at the end of the presentation are our next steps. One of those next steps is starting tomorrow as we start to provide this information to our families, and then occurring weekly till the start of school. We will be providing information and educational opportunities for our parents, for our families, for our students around protocols for start of school in the fall and what to expect and what that might look like. And then finally, we're going to be flexible with our staffing, and we're going to reassign staff as needed to cover the daily operational needs related to all of those things that you just heard me talk about. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Milzer to talk a little bit about some additional operational areas.
In the areas of lunch and transportation, lunch is on the left side of the slide. We're going to decrease the number of students in the lunchroom by adding additional lunch periods where possible, or using additional spaces that we have not used before to have more tables and having the students spaced out more. There won't be self-serve lines like we've had in the past. Lunch will either be pre-packaged or served by our staff using social distancing. And students will have assigned seats with the same group of students so that the number of contacts they have with other students is much smaller. In the area of transportation, we will have new sanitation procedures. The high-use surfaces will be sanitized between bus routes. Students will again have assigned seats so that they're near the same students and not having a large number of students they're in contact with. And then on the arrival at school, we're going to have multiple entrances available. A bus will be assigned to an entrance along with the students, and one bus will have the students exit at a time at each entrance so that we don't have a mass group of students going in at the same time.
We have spent extensive time since March thinking about our instructional model as we return back to school. Specifically at the 4K8 level, we have the opportunity to keep students in cohorts and controlled throughout the day. At the elementary level in 4K through 5, students will participate in all instructional activities within their classroom with the exception of physical education. They will travel to Phi-Ed and lunch, as Mr. Milzer spoke to, but they will stay within cohorts and have assigned seated areas. Art and music, there are other encore areas. Those teachers will travel during the first trimester for sure to the classroom to deliver instruction. So students will stay at the elementary level within their classroom with their peers throughout the academic day. At the middle school level, because of the house model, students are already in a cohort, and we're looking at options within the schedule on how the teachers can move from classroom to classroom with their cohort to meet the needs of the students, similar to the elementary model. However, with the expansive elective course offerings we have, that does pose the need for transitioning, but as Dr. Cohn outlined, we have those processes in place. And at the high school level, students will still transition from class to class. However, as we talk about modified schedule, we've looked at our current schedule and allocation of minutes at every level and determined what is essential, and then utilized time to build in transition plans to move students safely through the building, following the guidelines, as well as the aspects of coming into the classroom, sanitizing your hands, possibly sanitizing your cleaning or your workstation, and then moving into instruction, and having time allocated for end of class procedures where students are able to wash or sanitize their hands, as well as then clean up any workspaces they may have with cleaning supplies that are available. We're also looking, I mentioned the reduction of transition at the elementary level and how that will look, as students will again be present in their classroom for a majority of the day. We have pretty much eliminated field trips during the first half of the school year until further notice, and all assemblies or large group gatherings, with the exception of classes like band, physical education, choir, where we will have safety precautions in place, have been eliminated as well. One thing our staff will be working on this summer, time will be allocated for them with professional development and support to build a consistent virtual platform. We will be utilizing Google Classroom across the system with the exception of teachers who currently teach courses at the high school in the Buzz platform. Those will be our two main virtual learning platforms, and teachers will have the structures in place and ready to go in the advent, and I'll speak to this at our next slide, in the advent that we have to go virtual as well as homebound instruction. So teachers will come into the school year already with structures of a virtual classroom and platform in place, and we'll continue to add content and application of content to that as we progress through the school year. Currently, we have, as Dr. Miller said in her opening statement, we have many teams working. We meet every Tuesday from a curriculum standpoint. We are looking at our first trimester and quarter of curriculum in every content area and course across the system for K through 12, where we're looking at, with the time allocations that are available, allowing for those sanitation and transition pieces to be built in, what is essential, how are we still exceeding our standards through instruction, and what the scope of our day-to-day practices look like in order to deliver high-quality, face-to-face, in-person instruction. And then we are working on classroom practices adhering to social distancing and all of the universal safety precautions that Dr. Cohn outlined. So when you think about an example, at the elementary level, we do during literacy workshop have students gather at the carpet. That'll be no longer happening. Students will be in their workstations, socially distanced to the best we can, knowing that every classroom in this district is not the same size. So we'll be working actually next week on physical layout of our classrooms across the district and what that looks like in regards to the universal precautions, and then looking at our instructional practices of small groups, one-on-one instruction, and how we can still meet the needs of our students, but with the universal precautions and safety measures in place. In the event that we do have to close, as Dr. Miller and Dr. Cohn have discussed this evening, that possibly a classroom shuts down, a grade level, or a whole school, we want to be ready to move to a virtual environment. The last time this happened, we had 48 hours, and you can see the community feedback on that 48 hours, and we learned a lot during that time, as I've shared that with you at our last board meeting. In order to make sure that the virtual environment is as high as quality as we can provide for families and students in Franklin, we want to make sure we replicate a school day, consistently staying within a bell schedule or a schedule of a school, whether it be Pleasant View from 8:30 to 3:30, or the high school from 7:15 to 2:30. We want to maintain a full academic day in a virtual environment. I just addressed the consistent virtual platform. We want to make sure that for ease of student use as well as parent navigation and teacher consistency of practice, we have a consistent platform that all can attend to and utilize to their fullest potential. At 4K through 12, we will offer and we will instruct in all subject areas, specifically to the comments Dr. Cohn made around elementary, where we did reduce the number of content areas from not only an offering but also a grading aspect. We will move forward with all subject areas at every grade level across the system if we do have to go virtual. We did a great job in March of making sure every child had a device in their hand, depending upon the timeline of their virtual environment and our move to Google Classroom or Buzz. So we'll make sure that students have access to Chromebooks, not in the advent of virtual, but right away at the beginning of the school year, so that students can navigate the computer environment, specifically at the lower elementary, in case there is a shutdown of their classroom or their school. We want to stay consistent with a 5-day schedule. Children need routine in their lives, and we want to continue a 5-day schedule in the advent of a virtual environment. Attendance will be maintained through our current board policy. Student attendance would be taken through synchronous teaching. That's what would happen in our virtual environment. We would make sure we are meeting with students regularly. You think about a high school schedule, we would follow a bell schedule. You would check in full group with your students. You teach some type of lesson. There'd be some independent practice, as well as the teacher working virtually then with small groups or maybe bringing back whole group. Similar to the structures we put in place for summer school this summer in a virtual environment. Planning and preparation would still be at the forefront. What we learned and we heard over and over again from our teaching staff at the conclusion of the academic year when we had a professional development day, one of the biggest takeaways was the need for continued collaboration and people understanding that they're better together. So we will continue to build in prep time like we would in a face-to-face environment or in-person environment, as well as professional learning communities where teachers are collaborating, working together with system specialists and their administrative support. And then if we are to go to a virtual environment, whether it be at a small scale or a large scale like last spring, we know that not every home has family members home, as people will continue to work unless there is a complete shutdown. However, we want to make sure we work with our community partners, our local daycare providers, so that we are helping equip them in case the need for support in those environments is needed for those families who still are at work and their children may be with a grandparent, a relative, or even one of our local daycare providers. So if there is a shutdown for any reason and a virtual need, we'll make sure to make those connections and provide the supports that are needed so that every student has equitable access to our curriculum and instruction.
All right, our commitment to the social and emotional well-being of our students and staff is definitely still a priority. Fortunately, we have a strong foundation because of the planning and professional development that has already been part of our coherence plan. In order to enhance our capacity to create an emotionally safe and supportive school environment, all staff members have participated in professional development in one form or another, focused on the 3 areas that are listed on the left side of the slide. First of all, looking at the core competencies. The core competencies focus on understanding and managing your emotions, relationship building and maintaining, empathy, decision-making, and other social awareness skills. So you can see how developing and understanding those competencies in yourselves is really critical, especially as we are navigating unpredictable times. And you can think about students may have demonstrated strengths in these areas in a structured learning environment, and then how quickly, when they had to shift to a virtual environment, some of those other areas were more of a struggle when they needed to work independently. So it's important to really develop that in our students so they can function in no matter what the environment. The 3 signature practices are practices that create an emotionally safe and supportive classroom environment. And this is important because these practices are consistent throughout all of our classrooms in the district. And again, within that emotionally safe and supportive classroom, the emphasis is that each student is valued and included and they have a voice. So they are very connected with other students in their classroom community. And again, that's important so that students can really engage in deeper learning in those academic areas. And then finally, we're really viewing all of these strategies through a trauma-sensitive lens. So trauma-sensitive schools, we actually went through this training a couple of years ago because of our commitment to the safety grant. And the trauma-sensitive piece is really about understanding the impact of trauma on students. And right now, as we're living through this pandemic, we have to recognize that students are experiencing many different types of trauma, and so they're going to respond to that in different ways. And that will manifest in different ways as they transition back to school. So again, in this area, that's about developing relationships that are meaningful. It's about emotional safety and really developing resiliency. So one illustration that I think really stayed with our staff members as we engage in trauma-sensitive schools is thinking about the emotional backpack that we all carry with us. So, we don't know what some of the experiences are that students are living through right now, but they bring all of those experiences with them to the learning environment. So it's important that we acknowledge that, we can recognize what some of those needs are, and we're able to support them and make school a place where they can be safe emotionally and physically in order to learn. So those are the pieces that we have really focused on in a universal lens. When you look at understanding that as we come back together, students are going to demonstrate the different social and emotional needs as we re-engage in the school setting. So as those needs, the social and emotional needs change, we need to be responsive. So we have gathered some overall data. We had one question on the family survey. We've gotten some data at when teachers engaged in reflection at the end of the school year. And we recognize that it's important for us to continue to gather data on the social emotional needs. So we're looking at a variety of sources, potential screener to use, or student focus groups, or whatever that may be. But it's important to just continue to do that temperature check so we can be proactive and responsive to student needs. As we see students demonstrating the need for additional support, we do have a continuum of support. And so our student services providers are prepared to analyze that data and facilitate the supports that student needs, whether it would be engaging students in small groups or even one-to-one support. And then we also will continue to provide services through a CPA, which is our on-site clinic for families who need access to more intensive support. And then finally, through this whole process, we have really updated our list of additional community resources for families out in the community as they continue to have different needs as a result of COVID-19. So whether it be health concerns or financial issues, we're just trying to think about, again, meaningful connections and resources within the community. Dr. Cohn referenced earlier that we are really planning for several different scenarios. One scenario that we know is a reality for us is that we have students who have medical needs that really put them in a position where they are at risk and they would not be able to attend school. We also acknowledge that they are living with family members who also could be seriously at risk. So we are looking at our homebound policy. We had a policy in place, but when it was developed and revised, we were not living through a pandemic. So recognizing the current state of things, we are going to review and revise the policy to include how we will respond when family members could potentially be at risk because of exposure. So that policy will be updated by August, early August. And then we have a team coming together to develop a more streamlined and a systematic approach to how we will provide the homebound virtual instruction. So part of the work of the team is really looking at an effective and efficient application process. It's looking at instructional programming, and again, looking at some of the different situations or the individual medical needs. So if there is a student who can't participate because of their own medical needs, their programming needs may be different than a student who can't attend because they have a family member at risk. So we want to come up with several different options to provide their instruction for them at home. And again, it's based on individual needs. We're also looking at putting together what potentially we may need for resources and staffing support, and then a consistent way of communicating with all of the homebound team members, monitoring progress, and then if we have students with an IEP, again, then how are we going to continue to provide the supports and services that students require. So the policy, just to back up a moment, it really is when we have students with medical needs who are not able to attend in person, we ask that those needs are documented by a physician, and then we have a team that comes together and works with the family to provide that programming. And finally, additional student services supports. We're responsible for ensuring equity and access to high quality learning for all of our students, given their varying needs. So one thing we are doing is really taking a look at our procedures and our practices. So we're examining currently just, I think, everything involved with the variety of services that we provide. When it comes to special education, we are looking at our process for conducting our evaluations in a more efficient manner and expediting the process, because we have several evaluations that were really put on hold because of the closure. So we need to look at how to quickly work our way through those evaluations and do them in, in the best quality way, given the time frame that we have. We're also looking at a way to determine the needs for additional services. We know that providing services for students in the virtual environment, was a challenge, and there were some limitations to that. So how do we quickly try to close that gap if there were some needs as a result of the closure? We're also looking at our transition needs. So we are planning for re-entry for all students and what that looks like. Some students, due to their special needs, may need some supports for those transitions leading up to the school year. So that is part of our planning. We're also thinking about how to transition students. So back in the fall, and then if and when we need to transition back to a virtual environment, what kind of information can we gather in terms of what worked well for students and what didn't? So really trying to be more, again, thinking about our previous experience in the spring, and then what can we learn from that and plan for intentionally. We're also thinking about how to engage parents in more meaningful ways. And in this piece in particular, we have to think about ways that we engage parents more as partners. And so when we have students with us in the buildings in person, how can we better equip families, again, anticipating that there may be a need for closure. So that might be coaching families, it could be doing more modeling of strategies for families, or preparing resources in advance. So just, again, thinking about really enhancing that parent partnership. And then finally, we are, again, assessing where we are with our multi-level systems of support. So looking at how we're providing interventions, what students may need, and how to gather, the current state of what those needs are and what students may require, just to, again, kind of close the gap.
Is this on? Can you hear me? Okay. The last two areas that we're working on are community ed and rec, and our athletics and activities program. So we do plan to offer our kids club programming. This is our child care program that's before and after school, but no other recreational programs for students will occur. With the kids club program, they'll be following the same universal precautions that we're following throughout the school day. With regard to adult programming, we've begun some of that adult programming, but that is occurring only after school, usually around 5:30, when most of our students are no longer present. We do extensive disinfecting, and all of the participants do sign waivers. We have a lot of people who want to use our facilities, and we're continuing to evaluate which leagues and feeder programs and events will be allowed. With regard to athletics program, most of you are aware, starting in July, we've begun some of that programming for our students. We're following very strict protocols that limit the number of students per coach, and absolutely social distance our athletes from one another. And we're doing that within the WIA guidelines. So again, the protocols are very specific, and as a matter of fact, one of our nurses just visited recently to ensure that that was actually happening, and she has reported to me that they're doing a very good job with following those protocols. We are not scheduling any competitions at this time. It's kind of important that we don't do that too soon, because that would bring other community members from other communities to this community, and that potentially could be problematic for us. And then we're going to begin the year assuming that there'll be no spectators. Even if we do have any level of competition, we are planning not to have large numbers of spectators at events. So this has given us an opportunity to kind of test how our protocols can work and slowly move forward with adding things back.
So just by way of closure, before I turn it over to Dr. Miller for some concluding thoughts, just a couple of things. One, what we shared with you tonight is incredibly high level, right? We understand that. There are, a ton of plans underneath each one of those bullet points and each one of the elements that you saw there. You heard Dr. Reuter reference teams, right? There are a variety of teams that are meeting and planning and will continue to meet and plan around these areas. And certainly we'll take the opportunity over the next month and a half, along with you and our community and our staff, to further explore these areas and talk about some of the detail behind them as we have information to share and pieces to discuss. The other thing I would say is I just want to reemphasize that at the end of the day, we're deeply committed to two things, right? One is the safety of our students and our community and our staff. We want to make sure that we are running effective programs safely, that we're maximizing the use of our buildings to keep them open, and that we're maintaining that in-person environment as much and as long as we can by maintaining safe and healthy spaces. The second area of deep commitment is to our educational program, right? We firmly believe, as do you and our community, that we're at our best as a school district when our students and our staff are together. And so we're trying to build a program with that in mind, while also making sure that we're equitably providing education to those that can't be present. And how do we support them and their educational development? And so it's as you've heard before, these are all uncharted waters, right? We're doing the best we can to meet those needs. We'll continue to learn, to grow, to be good listeners, to be good stewards, and to put forth the best educational program we can and adjust when we need to. By way of next steps, so certainly you're getting this information tonight. Tomorrow our staff and families will be getting this information. So we'll be sharing a message from Dr. Miller along with a recording of this presentation as well as the slide deck. On Friday, the 10th, we'll be sending out a staff survey. That staff survey will be engaging them in some of their recommendations and thoughts and ask a number of questions to garner some feedback. On the 16th, we'll be providing a transportation survey back out. We every year administer a transportation survey to our families to start to measure ridership. We did that earlier this year, but it was kind of pre all of this, right? And so given the protocols and where we are now, we want to resend that and get some information about how comfortable our community is in thinking about riding the bus and what that might look like. From there, we're going to continue this action plan development, right? Again, a lot of details we have to get into. We'll continue to get into those details and share them when we can. We're going to continue to monitor daily the evolving guidelines and health and safety information that's provided by the city, state, and federal government, as well as listen to our healthcare professionals, and then be agile enough to adapt as that information comes in. As you heard me say earlier, we're going to be kicking off weekly communication with our families leading up to the first day of school, where we seek to cover each of these planning areas in increments and provide some more depth and information about what these things look like. And then we'll be supporting that through additional protocol overviews and videos. We've also, we will be putting up tomorrow, I believe, a webpage dedicated to back to school with all of the information accessible and available to our families and students. So our goal is to be as communicative and as forthcoming and as transparent as we can in partnership with our families as we start to move towards the start of the school year.
So in closing, we'll answer any questions that you might have, but before we do, I'd like to thank the board for their close attention to this important work that we're doing on behalf of the students and the entire community. I'd like to publicly thank our leadership team for the very long hours they've put into this plan and will continue to put into this plan this summer and the entire next school year. As stated previously by Dr. Cohn, this matter is very personal, and the decisions we're making will not align with everyone's beliefs. It will take a lot of hard work and courage to do what is in the best collective interests of our staff and students. But using the phrase coined by Dr. Reuter in March, We got this. So with that, I'll open it up to questions. If you want to ask those questions, I will answer those. I feel appropriate I can answer, or I will have the directors answer them.
And if we can ask questions and kind of move around and not all just focus on one person, because I'm sure everybody's got questions. So, I don't, do you want to start, Mr. Gamble? Do you have questions?
Not right off the bat. I think Linda's already got her hand up.
Okay.
Yeah,
Listen, well, Mr. Sprague, you go first.
So, when we're talking about students that are medically vulnerable, and maybe we're gonna change this, Ms. Cody, maybe we're gonna change this, policy, but how do we plan on vetting if somebody's medically vulnerable? What percentage do we think are medically vulnerable or won't come? Maybe you can talk about that.
All right, I'm trying to think of the percentage. Lori or Molly, do you have an idea on that?
I believe we had collected that data and shared it with Dr. Cohen. When we looked at some of the data shared with us in registration from the 2019-2020 school year, from what we could see just based on that information, it looked like approximately 3 to 5% of our students would fall into that category. That doesn't account for those students who would have siblings or parents that may fall into that category.
And I think one of the things to know as far as predicting what that means for us is that we've reached out to a lot of our community pediatrician and our specialty provider colleagues to ask how they will be recommending those pockets of high-risk populations, so kids with diabetes or lung disease or heart disease. You can talk to those specialty providers and say, what do you foresee that you'll be recommending? But as we've mentioned, the virus and the data around it is changing so quickly that they're really waiting until we get closer to the start of school to make that official recommendation across the board. So it's really being done on an individual basis right now, which means student A with this diagnosis might get a different recommendation for how to safely proceed with school than student B.
Is that all, Mr. Sprague?
For now.
Okay. Mrs. Kowski?
How are you tied in with the health department then? How do you work with them on a daily basis? I mean, is there a call-in?
Ms. Call, Ms. O'Neill, and I have a weekly call with Courtney Day from the Franklin Health Department. So I personally speak with her once a week, and I know they speak with her more frequently. As a matter of fact, our nurses have been working with the Franklin Health Department for several months, helping them with their contact tracing.
But how would once everybody's back in school, how do they, like, who's sick today, I guess, is going to be, what's that daily, what's going on in the school regarding COVID-19? How do you track that? Or do you have?
If you could use the microphone, please, as you respond.
That's a great question, and we know that will be a very complex issue, and we, Ms. Call and I, communicate with the health department almost on a daily basis at this point. So, of course, a top priority for us would be to ensure in knowing that any student or staff would have a confirmed case of COVID-19. Of course, it would also be helpful for us to know anybody who has symptoms of COVID-19, family members who have COVID-19. There's various different things that we need to know. So we are going to continue to work with our community and the health department to ensure that we have the information as soon as possible and know that that communication with the health department is key. Knowing sometimes they get that information before we may, and we might get that information before they would. So that constant communication back and forth to ensure we have the most up-to-date, accurate information to ensure that we are not spreading illness if it's not necessary to.
So it sounds like the initial reporting of COVID-19 really comes through the medical side of a doctor making a diagnosis and then having to report that.
Correct.
And then it comes back to you. Parents aren't going to voluntarily.
It's a reportable disease by the state, so it is something that is reported to the health department. So even if the parents would not tell us, it is something that due to the laws, the health department would communicate with us due to that need to contact trace.
Mr. Lewis?
Talking about the classes possibly shutting down or a school shutting down, it was mentioned that if there was an outbreak, what is the definition of outbreak? Is it one person, or is it 4 people, or how is that going to be determined if that were to happen?
Sure. So I think if we would find out that there would be a student that tested positive for COVID-19 in a classroom, our first priority is to figure out the close contacts of that student. We would not want to say everybody in the classroom necessarily needs to be quarantined if they haven't had close contact with that student. I think at different levels that could look different. We want to start small, but we want to do what's in the best interest and safety for our students and families. So that is part of the work that Ms. Call and I will do to ensure quick communication with staff members to know what that looks like and how we would deal with it. We would work with the health department to find out, is it in the best interest of the students that we would close down that classroom, or could we safely say these few handful of students would be asked to be at home in quarantine?
All right. The planning looks great. I think you've done a great job in all aspects. One of the things that I did not see, though, and right now I see the need to make to take all the precautions, but I did not hear anything about when any of these protocols would end. Is it one case in Franklin and then we can end all this, or what is the determining factor to get things back to normal and when this would all end?
I think we have to continue to dialogue around that with the health department. You know, the city itself has phases by which you open things up, and we haven't gotten that far, to be honest with you, to develop potentially our phases for opening things up.
We should probably do something like that, though, I would think.
So it is a conversation and a plan that we need to put in place, but frankly, our efforts right now have been focused on this.
True, and I just understand that totally.
Correct.
But I think the next step would be for us as a school district to put some of those steps in place that we internally can follow.
We've talked a lot about the children and having underlying conditions. What about our staff? Because they will also deal with an age issue. Over 65, you're more vulnerable. And then the underlying health issues. Do we know how many we have in our staff that we've got to be a little bit more protective of?
I will ask Ms. Allyhausen, our Director of Human Resources, to respond to that.
Thank you. Staff will be surveyed on July 10th, as indicated in the last slide. When it comes to the employment side, there's very different laws that come into play. And you saw in the beginning when Dr. Cohn talked about some of the precautions that are in place in order to ensure safety of staff. Just like there would be in a manufacturing environment where you have to ensure those type of safety protocols. So they're going to be put in place. At the same time, the laws that allow staff to kind of exit employment are limited to the leave laws that exist and their qualification for leave under the leave laws. Absent qualification for leave under the leave laws that exist now, they have to make a determination, just like they would at any place of employment, if this is the right environment for me based upon my circumstances to join the workforce.
Okay, but are we going to do so? You have a very good teacher who's 65 years old. Can they do something like the virtual learning, where they would be videotaped, and that would be what they would do? They would not have direct interaction with the kids. You hate to lose a really good person, or haven't we even come to that bridge yet?
Well, the reentry plan starts in a face-to-face environment.
Okay. I understand. Thank you.
Okay, I'd like to talk about masks. I believe in masks. As many of you know, I have a loved one in the hospital for 80 days. 53 days on a ventilator, not related to COVID, but I worry every day that he might get COVID, and I want to do everything I can not to get it. We know we're split with our survey on masks. The community is, there are so many people in the community that are very rebellious against masks. Hand washing is so important, and sanitizing. But one of the things I see with masks is that people aren't properly educated in how to wear a mask. So I'd like to know if we're going to educate our staff on how to wear a mask and not touch their faces, and things like that. And even, it's going to be hard with students, but even our high school students that choose to wear a mask.
Absolutely. Then I think our nurses could speak to their plans for doing that. But not wearing a mask properly, you might as well not have one on at all. So we do plan to do that. If you want to speak to it?
Yeah, I think we would be thrilled to demonstrate and educate the staff and community and students on how to properly wear a mask and why they are important. We haven't figured out exactly how, but we know, I think we could utilize just a video of how to put one on, how to take one off. Even washing your hands, like you said, that is also a key thing, and we know that there will be many, many, many opportunities throughout the day to do so. So, and I think putting, familiar faces for students to watch us do it and have us talk through it, or, any one of our staff, principals, just talk through those things, and we would be happy to do that. I think that will be key to the communication that goes out with parents each week.
Thank you. And to Mr. Lewis's point about being prepared to go back to normal, the flip side to that is if we have a class or two that comes down with something, can you talk about that? If one teacher or one class gets infected?
I believe Dr. Reuter spoke to that and how we would provide the learning for that group. And do you have something more specific?
Well, I mean, about how quickly it could shut us down.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if Ms. O'Neill wants to speak to that because it relates to what we were talking about earlier in terms of the number of students and how quickly might a whole school close down is kind of the question.
And is that it's up to the health department? Yeah.
Yeah, it is correct that it is up to the health department. Ms. Call and I were working today on specific scenarios that we think we may face, whether it is a student who is called in with symptoms of COVID or is shared with us that has a positive COVID test, or a student coming into the health room with a fever and a cough, which are symptoms of COVID. What do we do? What are our next steps? And we are aware that that is something we may see in the first week of school. So we want to be prepared for that. We are hoping that our plan can be one that parents know if their children are exhibiting any symptoms to please keep them home. But we do want to be prepared that there is a chance that within the first few weeks of school, we could see suspected cases of COVID or positive cases of COVID within staff or students in our building.
Thank you. Mr. Gamble?
Yeah, I do want to say it's a great 10,000-foot view of opening the schools back up, plus some contingencies. One kind of question I have, I saw on the slides a bullet point, and I know, like you said, there's a lot of different steps under these, but one of them was community partners, and it specifically said, work with daycare providers to assist in virtual facilitation. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so in the event that a classroom, let's say at Pleasant View, 3rd grade, had to be shut down, and we know that, to Dr. Cohn's point, there's 22 to 28 kids in that classroom, and those students will then go home, and maybe it is a student in the classroom or the teacher came down with COVID, but the students have to be quarantined for a period of time. Rather than closing down instruction, we have the virtual environment that will be launched for those students to continue the instruction. But we know that not every parent then may be home with their child and may have to send their child to a local daycare provider or a relative's home. We will then develop a communication plan and supports to help assist those people that may be providing that educational experience virtually, if it's able to be done in those environments, so that it's not, if I don't have a parent at home, I don't go to school. We want to continue school regardless of the circumstances at right.
But if you're shutting down a class because of possible COVID, those kids would be at home because they wouldn't be going to daycare if they're supposed to be quarantined.
There could be an in-home provider that says, sure, I'll take your kid while you're at school, or a grandparent that says, sure, I'll watch you because
All right.
mom and dad still have to work. And the daycare providers that aren't licensed maybe do that as well. So we have to remember that not everyone will have a parent at home, just like we didn't during March 13th through the end of the academic year, that there were homes where parents were working full-time virtually or even still essential employees. So we don't want to shut the door on students in those situations to any access to educational experience.
How much more likely is a class to be shut down if they aren't, if everybody in the class is wearing a mask and one kid comes in with COVID one day? Does that, I suppose we don't know, but does that class get shut down and everybody gets quarantined for an amount of time? And is it more likely that this will happen if the kids are wearing masks versus not wearing masks? Maybe that's not a very well-worded question, but.
No, I get what your question is. So the point of the mask wearing would not change our quarantine for somebody that's exposed. Like if you and I are face-to-face for an hour, in very close contact, we would still be under quarantine if one of us was positive, whether or not we were wearing masks. But the risk of transmission of the virus is much lower if we're wearing masks. So that is the point of that. It would not eliminate the quarantine that would be necessary, but the risk of us sharing the virus, transmitting it from one another, is much less with wearing masks.
So would that, is that a quarantine, say a quarantine is 2 weeks?
Sure.
Is that quarantine in effect for that child, even if they take a test 3 times and it comes back negative?
We would go
that
with,
means they don't have to be quarantined, correct?
Sure.
Or am I wrong about that completely?
right now, as the direction from the state in the CDC says, for the quarantine for a close contact with somebody positive with COVID-19, it is 14 days, because they still could develop symptoms on day 14. So if they had a negative test on day 1, day 3, day 5, because of that exposure, there is a possibility they could develop symptoms through the 14 days. Does that make sense? Did I answer your question?
You did answer my question.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Lukowski?
Just to follow up on that one. So if they tested negative, though, they can't give it to somebody else, though, right? During that, I mean, if you don't have it, how can you give it to somebody else, I guess?
So if they tested negative on a certain day, that means they don't have it on that day. There is still a chance that they could develop it at some point. They haven't yet had enough response in their body to test positive, but there is still a chance that on day 10, they could test positive. So as it stands right now, even with negative tests for a close contact, that time frame remains 14 days. That may change, but that is what the guidance is from the CDC and the state at this point.
Okay, thank you.
So if one child in a classroom is tested and found to have it, they've probably interacted with all the other children, so you really have to kind of quarantine the whole class and their parents. So this is going to mushroom into something that's might be difficult to deal with, for sure.
Is our objective to prevent anybody from getting COVID-19? Is that at all possible? No, it's not.
But how many
No.
cases do we have in Franklin? It might be possible.
About 204? Yeah, yes. yesterday.
Currently,
Yesterday?
have 200 for current cases, or
Well,
have
that's how,
had since inception?
since,
Right, okay. So, I mean, initially, it was to flatten the curve, but now it seems we've changed to prevent anybody from getting it. I don't want to sound sarcastic, but people will get COVID. I mean, there's some philosophy around that everybody will get it at some point in time. I don't have a question, it's just a comment.
Can you speak to passing in the halls and the commons, especially in the high school and middle school?
Yeah, that probably poses one of our greatest challenges with 1,100 middle school students plus staff and 1,500 high school students and staff and on a bell schedule. As you heard Dr. Cohen say, some of our universal precautions are related to traffic patterns and moving kids, the elimination possibly of locker usage so that there isn't the gathering behind passing time, minimizing passing time to get traffic moving, and people in the halls, right? All hands on deck to continue the flow of traffic so that kids get to their class, sanitize their hands, get to their workstations, and then we can start instruction. That's why we have looked at schedule and allocation of times for instruction, but allocation of time for the actual block of the period and how we're going to itemize that time for teaching and learning as well as those precautions we put in place. But that does pose the greatest probably barrier when you have that large mass of people moving, especially their kids. And we know middle school and high school kids like to gather.
Yeah. And the other thing is lunch. Okay, they'll have the assigned lunch tables and what about the going outside issue with wearing coats and things like that, to be in a hurry to go out? Will that not be allowed anymore? I'm only asking that because it just doesn't seem proper to carrying so many things, with you just for the sake of time.
We haven't quite explored
Yeah.
the whole code issue quite yet, because we're assuming when we start, it will not be so necessary. But our elementary principals as a team are working on playground protocols.
Yeah.
How to spread kids out on the fields. We're fortunate because we have nice facilities with lots of space, so we can assign areas for children to play and areas where they can't congregate. So they're working on a plan for each of their schools to do that. And we're still trying to determine if it's at all safe for them to use play equipment. It may be if we disinfect it. So it's still a work in progress, to Mr. Gamble's point. There's lots and lots of details. Every time you think of one thing, you think of another that, needs to be figured out and resolved. But absolutely, the areas outdoors are important for us to also ensure that there's some social distancing.
Have we investigated any thermal monitoring equipment, for students when they come into the building or anything like this? I know there's been some talk about companies doing that. Have we looked at that at all?
So we continue to follow what best practice might be with regard to taking temperatures, and there's a lot of mixed information about how effective that can be. I think our nurses could speak to that as well. The accuracy of it, there's some liability involved in doing it as well.
Sure.
So we continue to explore that. We most definitely are going to be asking our parents to take their child's temperature before they send them to school, and we're going to ask our staff to do the same. So that's important to us.
Competitions, you said, will there be competitions in middle school?
The middle school program probably will not have much going on, but it's to be determined.
Okay, and then you said no spectators to start with. Is that even parents in the high school, no parents?
So one of the things that they're thinking about is perhaps each player could get 2 tickets so that those those parents or whomever could be well socially distanced within the stadium. So we want to find a good balance there, but certainly filling the stadium this fall will not be a good thing to do.
We, I don't remember hearing anything about physical education. Entire.
Yeah, physical education will continue at every level. In fact, I think I alluded to at the elementary level will be one of the times that cohorts leave their classroom. They stay in their cohort, but they go to physical education. It is not recommended to wear masks at any time during physical education because of the levels of cardio activity. And we have cleaning and sanitation pieces in place for equipment, similar to art, technical education areas, as well as in the choir and general music. We're highly recommending at this point masks because students raise their voice, obviously, and speak, and which can lead to droplets to be emitted into the atmosphere. However, we've gotten some guidance from the state music department and band. We continue to explore how that will work and can be socially distanced while still upholding a band program. One of the aspects we're looking at is when we shift our curriculum, do we start with theory at the beginning and redevelop our work so that as we know more, then we can get into the actual tactical sense of band, as well as those areas of tech ed, making sure we have prioritized sanitary protocols in place with machinery and equipment.
Ms. Allyhausen, Ms. Cody talked about the emotional backpack for students. What about staff?
Yep, so that's a great question because it's not going to be much different, and then we're going to ask them to be able to deploy that for students. So as we continue to release this information, remember you're seeing it, our staff is going to see it. We're going to conduct the survey so that we can get some of their input into what they're going to see and be able to assess their readiness level to return, because we're like 30 days from reopening and we have a lot of work yet to do. And as we do that, there will be feedback loops with our staff to see what support and resources they need to do the work we're going to ask them to do. And just like with the students, we have to gather that data and make sure we're meeting their needs where they're at versus just assuming what they do or don't have at their readiness level.
Thank you. Any more questions?
Just one question. So, we're going to do this. How do we monitor how it's going? Wait for people to call and complain, or do you have, what does success look like in terms of, other than no cases, but people are going to have their opinions and suggestions? How do you, are you prepared for that?
Dr. Cohen, would you like to?
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of ways we're going to stay in contact, right? I think pulse surveying will be really important for us. So making sure that we're getting a regular kind of surveying of our students, our staff, our families, to get a sense of their experience and things that they're concerned about and kind of what's happening, right? We've utilized focus groups in the past as another potential resource there. And then from an instructional program standpoint, Dr. Redder, I don't know if you want to speak to how we continue to monitor effectiveness there.
Yeah, we don't intend to change any of our in-classroom assessment practices, and so we'll be able to gauge from an internal standpoint academic success. What we have started to consolidate is our day-to-day practice, but we'll still measure at the same level of expectation that we have set in every program, and we'll utilize that data to be actionable in short cycles to determine what next steps are in areas that we know we're going to have gaps from the spring and the levels of engagement that students were able to participate in. So it's about being responsive and demonstrating that flexibility more than ever. And like I said in one of the slides, the all hands on deck collaborative approach for every student.
I don't think we need to see it as a failure by any means if we would see cases of COVID in our schools. We will see it. We know we will. There's 4,500 kids and hundreds of staff members. So I don't want anybody to think it's some sort of failure if that would occur, because we expect that it will happen. It's a pandemic, and it's in the community, and it's everywhere. So I think it's one of those where we need to know that it will happen, and how we can respond to that will be, show our character.
Thank you to leadership for all the work that went into the plan, and I'm sure we'll hear quite a bit of feedback on it from the whole community when it comes out. That's expected, so, but thanks for all the work. It's very detailed. Thank you. Okay, so next we'll move on to item 9D, the update on Title IX changes. Ms. Ellerhausen.
Yes, thank you. So I'm just going to give you a very brief update of what you will see forthcoming in the next board meeting. Title IX is an enforceable law by the Office of Civil Rights. It's as old as me. I'm going to stop there. I know you're all giggling behind those masks.
Oh, it's as
But
old as
it's as
oh.
old as me. Its basic premise is really centered around students and protecting people based on sex from discrimination in educational programs or activities. When most people look at Title IX, they think about it from a lens of athletics. But it really is bigger than that. It can apply to the curriculum programs we offer, the way we discipline students, to the counseling we provide, scholarships. It has a very broader reach than most association that we have, but it has been around for quite some time. And it applies collegiately, right, as well as in our world. And most of the time, one of the things collegiately you hear often about in its premise or its foundational level is admission to or participation in. So that's really where it has its roots. On May 6th, the Department of Ed came in and implemented new regulations. With these new regulations, it is really targeted and focused at sexual harassment. And so that's really where this particular new implementation is going to flourish in the way in which we practice the application of this law. It really comes from an accountability level, and I'm sure you can think back to many cases that have occurred over the number of years, and predominantly, again, at a collegiate level, that has pushed upon this. And the failures of some of those cases to respond equitably and promptly to the misconduct. So as a result, I'm just going to give you the key highlights of what the new regs are going to push in on. It actually now defines sexual harassment, and there are 3 key conduct issues that you will see in the definition of the policy that needs written. There's also then a triggering of our obligation when we have knowledge of a complaint to respond. And this is another key piece, is it pushes in on the accountability measure for us as a system to have Title IX coordinators, male and female, from a response level standpoint. The second piece, and this is going to be a little bit confusing because we think of the fact that we have a grievance procedure that was put in place when Act 10 went into enforcement, but this is a totally different grievance process. This grievance process you're going to see formed into policy has very legal requirements around how the investigation is handled and what access to information exists within the investigation. Another key component is that investigators, that Title IX coordinator, cannot be the decision maker. So there's another role player in who makes the decision as a result of any investigation that's conducted, and then there must be an appeal process as well. So the other element I'll kind of push and so you'll understand when I get to what you're going to see, is Title VII still applies. Now, Title VII is much older than me. And you're all giggling behind those masks, right? Title VII is on the employment side. And so we still have that requirement that exists for discrimination in employment, which also applies to sexual harassment, where you think about that from the element of employee to employee misconduct. So when I looked at our policies, and what I'll do in the next several weeks is take those policies with our council and make sure that we are compliant with the requirements. What I have to do in order to do that is take policies 4010 and policies 5010 and make them 4 different policies. Pulling out the discrimination, right, based on think religion, creed, ancestry, and then a policy that's standalone for sexual harassment. I have to do that both on the student side and then on the employment side, so that we are legally compliant. Council will review those with me as I do the work to make sure that all of those elements I talked about, particularly the extensiveness of the student sexual harassment policy that will exist, are in place. And once they're in place, we will use them to begin our practice so that we are compliant if there would be a complaint that's raised. And that will keep us in the time frame of the August 14th date, even though you will not see the policies until the August 19th board meeting. Okay? So we will begin to use those practices should a complaint come our way. The other part that is yet to be determined, and this is a state issue, is there's required training, there's required notices that will have to be posted. The training of the Title IX coordinators is something that has to happen, but it's not quite available yet in order for us to be compliant. So we are supposed to hear more about that in early August, and we'll make sure our Title IX officers on the student side, and then there will be Title VII officers on the employment side, are trained.
Who does that training? Is that through CISA or?
It's a great question.
Okay.
Who would be our coordinator?
Probably, let me answer that in a second. Probably legal firms, Janet, are who are gonna handle that. I'm sorry, will you re-ask your question?
Who would be our coordinators? Is it a teacher, or, I mean, who?
Probably on the employment side
Oh, okay,
and on the student side
okay.
will be Mrs. Cody and Dr. Cohn or Dr. Reuter.
And what triggered the new regulations, if I may ask?
They're really preempted by some of the cases that you would have seen that were really missteps or failures to respond promptly and equitably to complaints that were raised.
It's been in the works for some time, as I understand it. I mean,
It's about 3 years.
Yeah.
And there was extensive comments and feedback loops before the regulations were put into place. But they are also being challenged.
Okay.
Do you guys have any other questions? But otherwise, August 19th, you will see all 4 of those policies I referenced.
Okay. There's also a video that I can share with the board. It's only 15 minutes long, but it speaks to what Ms. Allyhausen just talked about. If you want to view that again to refresh your learning around this, I'll send that to you.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Item 9E is the Board of Education 2020-2021 Policy Review Schedule. Dr. Miller?
So I just tried to lick my finger for my paper. Did you ever try to open those bags in the produce department without licking your?
Ew, no.
Okay, we're all learning, right? So this is a draft of the policy review schedule for this year. It is not in the order in which we plan to review these policies. I still have to do that work, but we're really doing good work around keeping up with our policies. The ones in orange are policies that are 10 years or older. But I'm proud to say that we don't have any policies from 1992 anymore. So we've done good work. So I would just, ask for the board's approval on using this list. Ms. Larson did review the list, and she did approve it. And we could move forward then with scheduling these policies. We did get through, after this evening, all of the policies we scheduled for last school year, and that was a lot.
And looking at the schedule, I see there's like the 4 of them for Franklin Community Education, and so there's more. They are.
Yeah, I'm sorry, the text was cut off. I apologize. Yeah, there's more text that belongs to
okay.
those.
Okay.
So it's community education and rec access to programs, that's
Thank you.
9020.
Oh.
9320 is department fee structure. 9440 is cameras and recording devices prohibited. And 9535 is discipline and disruptive behavior.
So does this get us through all the policies every 10 years, or what's the cycle, review cycle?
So the approach is to look at the policies that are already over 10 years old and make sure that we're reviewing those. And that number of policies, because we have so many, there's always going to be some that, and 10 years goes pretty fast.
I've recognized all of them now.
Yeah, so it isn't that a specific policy is in a cycle for review. It's based on the current dates, and we always want to look at our oldest policies and review them. And then also, we do operational policy work too along the way. But each of these policies isn't like scheduled for a particular time to be reviewed. I suppose we could kind of look at it that way. And then we'd map this out for the next 10 years. So,
Well, I think we try to get it shorter, to get your head around these policies, because this is our work. But if it takes us 10 years to get through, you have to be in the board 10 years to really.
There'll always be another one that's getting old, though, when you have that many.
There could always be a new one added to this.
Right.
That the state, adds to this. So, do we have consensus?
Yeah, I just need consensus that
Consensus
this
from
would
the
be the
board?
list. It's really flexible, so we can, I can reorganize it, and then we can get it posted and start the work. Okay.
Okay, then without objection, we have consensus from the board to approve this. Okay, thank you. Then item 8F, the treasurer's report is available in the board docs library. And item 10, school board liaison reports. We have 10A, personnel and policy, policy 4212, benefits for administrative staff. Dr. Miller.
This is one of our older policies, and I believe it was on the list even the year prior, and it did not come to the board for review. But what we've done over time is we've moved the policies pertaining to benefits and our employees into our employee handbook. This policy is currently outdated, and it should, and it is for the most part, and I'll let Ms. Allyhausen help me out with this, in our employee handbook. So there are pieces of this that are outdated, so this policy should not be a policy that's currently in place for this district right now. So the recommendation is to eliminate the policy because the parts that are current are in the employee handbook.
Okay. Now I have even, okay, when the agenda came out, I was kind of okay with this in the handbook, but then now you're saying there are parts that are outdated, so for us to say eliminate it and put it in the handbook, that's an issue for me because we don't know what's outdated and what you're going to pop into the handbook, and knowing that some of this is fiscal, well, actually, it's all fiscally related, and again, the handbook only comes to us when there's a fiscal change. That's the only time it comes to the board. So I guess I would like to know what's outdated on here and what you plan on putting in the handbook. And actually, for me, after considering this, I'm thinking that there's just too much as a board that we're taking out of our control, especially fiscally. I mean, this is for you as administrators to follow, and an employee handbook is for employees to follow. So I'm opposed to this, especially after what you just said.
Can I clarify that?
Yeah.
There would be no changes to the employee handbook. The employee handbook already has all of this in it, and it has, for example, in the training area, I believe, professional in-service and reimbursement, it's different already in the employee handbook, and more restricted and up-to-date than this. So by eliminating this, there are no changes to the employee handbook. And the employee handbook, when changes are made that are fiscal, has to come back to the board to be reapproved. So this is a policy that's just been hanging out there while all of this information is in the handbook, and now the handbook is up to date and has been, but this policy isn't, and we don't need it to go back to and have two different things on the same information. So that's really what this is about. It isn't about changing the policy. Or the handbook. The handbook already has everything in it.
So if the board, let's say the board decides that we don't want to pay 100% of dental anymore, we would have to request that the handbook be changed?
Well,
Or when do we review things like that?
We don't.
Okay, well, that's, my point is we should be reviewing things like that.
That would probably be a discussion when we're talking about dental insurance, let's say, or health insurance. The board's looking at the entire health and dental package and saying, well, how does this work? Well, maybe we want to do this with it or this with it. And that would lead to a change that would then be reflected in the handbook.
Yeah. And for example, insurance number 1 would give, if this policy were in application, is a higher level of benefit than the current handbook, which is the governing document that we're applying.
Right. No, I understand that. Okay, so we are reviewing the information in other places.
Right.
In not just this policy. It would be in the annual insurance review primarily for all of this information, pretty much. Except not the vacation stuff and all that, that's different.
So is all the professional improvement part in the handbook, just as it is here? No. Don't you think it would have been wise to bring the handbook here with the updates for us to look at? So we could,
So you're saying the professional improvement stuff is not in the handbook?
Part of it is.
Part of it is?
The part that's in application now, but for example, 4 in the way it's written is not applied in the handbook the same way.
Well, the last time we saw this was 2006, right?
Correct.
When was the last time the handbook came into play?
2010, and has been updated multiple times, even prior to my coming to the district, so.
but not here.
It just got left behind.
Is this supposed to be the overriding document that governs what's in that handbook, since this is a board policy?
Well, the hard part about that would be we don't have this policy for every other work group, and certainly the handbook is governing those work groups.
All of those policies were eliminated
Yeah.
for every other group as we went through and had all of their information in the handbook, then the policy was eliminated. And this one just got left behind, and at this point, we're just saying, this should be made the same as every other group, that everyone is focused on the employee handbook as the place with the information in it, rather than having a policy sitting there that we're not reviewing, because it's the only one of its kind left hanging out there.
But how did this get updated in the handbook before it came to us to get updated here? Because this is the policy.
So with the insurance, the board
No.
voted on a change to insurance. That should have been reflected as a change also in the policy.
But professional improvement, you said, is changed in the handbook, but we didn't approve it in this policy.
No, it's a lesser benefit
Yeah.
than we have here, so it doesn't cost the district more.
But we still didn't approve this policy. We didn't approve any change in this policy, and you're saying it changed in the handbook.
Right.
That's what I'm trying to say.
And the same
Is
thing.
all of this information in the handbook?
There's either this information exactly or the newer updated information for those things. And those are the two best examples are that employees are paying more for health insurance than this policy would make them do. And our professional improvement is different, and it's not just for this group.
The handbook does apply to administrative staff.
Yes.
So there's a fiscal change in the handbook that we didn't approve, is what you're saying?
There isn't a change in the handbook that costs the district more.
But it's still a fiscal change.
Maybe. It kind of depends. I mean, how many people are taking advantage of professional development in a year? How many miles are they driving? What did they get reimbursed for that?
No, it's still a
Did they
fiscal
take a credit?
change.
So there, it was meant to make it the same across the groups, and it's less of a benefit. So it wouldn't come to the board unless it was an additional cost.
No.
If it was everybody takes 12 credits, then it would come to the board to say, this is an additional cost, this is a higher benefit. Are you okay with that? Would you approve this higher benefit that's going to cost more? Or on the insurance piece, employees would pay less than they do now. You'd have to vote on that, and then it would go into the handbook.
Dr. Miller, this is a policy that changed and we didn't approve it, plain and simple. That's disturbing.
So the insurance was voted on by the board. So what was written here in policy did not match with what the board approved for insurance.
Then the policy should have come to the board, and I'm talking specifically now about professional development, improvement. So I'm going to make a motion to deny eliminating policy 4212. Is there a second? Is there a second? Motion fails. Is there another motion? Any other motion?
Well, the motion that's requested is that we eliminate this policy.
You can make any motion you choose. I made a motion to deny eliminating it. You want to make a motion to eliminate it?
I want to ask a question, and that is, if we do eliminate this now, does that also eliminate our need to have approved a change that you think was not done correctly? Because this would no longer exist.
Yes,
Then I move that we eliminate this procedure.
I second it. Oh, wait, you move, I'm sorry. I
That we
moved-
eliminate this policy.
Okay, I withdraw my second.
I'll second.
We have a motion to eliminate policy 4212, benefits for administrative staff, and we have a second. Any discussion?
It seems like we're not really looking at the handbook
No, we're not.
Yes,
regularly.
yes, I agree.
That's a problem.
I agree with that also.
That should be another discussion.
Well-
Right, what we have in front of us is we have an outdated policy that we allowed by votes that we took as a board and our predecessors to update the handbook without a corresponding simultaneous update to policy, i.e. this, to reflect those changes.
When the handbook was approved, it was approved with the condition that it comes back to the board every time there was a fiscal change, not for any other change.
Physical change or a fiscal change?
Fiscal.
I'm sorry.
Fiscal.
Thank
Fiscal
you.
change. Not if it was a positive change or a negative change, a fiscal change.
So every year when you do an insurance renewal, there potentially is a change that goes in the handbook as a result of that. So then that would mean the handbook would have to come too, which is redundant. You know, it's like if you approve through a motion and a vote to change the premiums that employees pay, we simply put that in the handbook. That handbook shouldn't have to come back for you to approve that, because you've already approved it.
But as I said to you, when we were making out the agenda, you just bring it the same day, and it's just, okay.
Right, it just comes
It's
along
just-
with it. The handbook comes with the same time you make the benefit change.
Okay.
Doesn't have to be separate action. And some of these things, like the holidays, I mean, not that we would change the holidays, but what if we want to change the holidays? Is there how would that happen? Or, and some of these leaves, and, because changes were made, obviously, and
Yeah. I don't think the board wants to go back to separate policies for food service employee benefits and
No.
clerical staff benefits and administrative benefits. I don't think you want to go back to separate policies around that. It's better that they're all in the handbook. I think we agree. But where we're landing now is the board wants to see that handbook more often. But any item in the handbook that, the board collectively wants to review can be brought forward for review. But that's what I'm hearing, that the board would like, when we make a change that has a fiscal impact on the district, that is reflected in the handbook, that handbook get reapproved on that date as well, is what I'm hearing.
Or do we need to reapprove the handbook yearly or every other year, or? I don't know.
Handbook review, biannual handbook review or something,
yeah, I think that would be.
It sounds
That'd be
like we haven't
helpful.
reviewed
Yeah,
the
well,
handbook
it's
since
something,
2010.
I mean, in the private sector, we used to look at our handbook every couple of years. Couple of reasons was for legal compliance and everything else, just to look at the wording and et cetera. And I'm sure you should be doing something like that anyhow. But as a board, we should probably be taking a look at it also.
The handbook changes is a document that exists, that comes out annually, goes into the library with the current handbook. You are absolutely correct, Mr. Lewis. There are things that I have to change in the handbook because law preempts me to require to change them. I do believe that the professional improvement section of the handbook that you did approve is the governing piece, and this is outdated, just like this benefits section. Because at some point, the handbook had been approved, professional improvement, whether it's this group or any other group, because it certainly applies, there's professional improvement that applies to other work groups as well, was approved at that point in time. That section hasn't changed in my 3-year tenure here. But when this policy, which is from, 2006, came up for review, this language, some of this language is clearly not, again, in alignment with the handbook that was approved in 2010. And certainly this benefit section, if this becomes the governing document, provides a greater benefit on the amount paid by this particular work group.
I understand Janet's concern, but I think we are approving the items in the handbook as they come up in our meetings. I agree that we probably don't need this policy, but I also think that a systematic handbook review by the board is necessary.
Well, for that, you'll need a motion and a second and a vote, because it was already approved when the handbook was approved. And it's really not an agenda item, but you can still make a motion anytime on you know, but, so if you want to do that, you have to do that.
Are you saying we have a policy on the handbook?
No, it's when the handbook was approved, that was part of the approval, that it would only come back if there was a financial change. So
Gotcha.
if you want to make a motion, you can do that.
Yeah, because there's so many other small changes that would be on the board table every meeting. So that was why it was just the fiscal pieces. So.
Well, there's a,
But at this point, we have a motion and
There's
a
a
second.
motion and
And
a
and we
second.
need to vote on that one, and then we can
So right now,
open another motion.
we have a motion to eliminate, and a second to eliminate policy 40 to 12. Any further discussion on that? Can we have a roll call, please, on that?
Mr. Alexandrovich?
Aye.
Mr. Lewis?
aye?
Mr. Gamble?
Aye.
Mr. Sprague?
Aye.
Mrs. Evans?
No?
Mrs. Witkowski?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you. So is there a motion on a handbook before I move on? A specific motion, or no?
I'll make a motion to have the board, or at least make an agenda item for handbook review. I don't, you know, it can be just track changes, opportunity to look at the document, and any board member can bring any change for discussion, once a year.
Oh, okay. So you're asking a motion to,
Do a board review of the handbook, an agenda item that would trigger the sharing of a track changes document
oh, okay,
of the handbook and then there'd be an agenda item where anybody could bring up any change that they saw that they weren't familiar with or had asked any questions, and that would be the review.
is there a second to that? Like, what month do you want this?
It could be,
Is there a suggestion from the administration to this month?
and you do it once a year, you said, right?
And they follow suit to a school year, so it would have to be in the month of August, that
August.
the handbook is prepped for the ensuing school year. Employees have to sign off on it, et cetera.
August. All right, August.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion?
Yeah, if we're gonna do this annually, we should only discuss the changes.
Yep.
Correct.
All right, can
And
you,
not even all the changes, just anyone that there was questions on.
let's restate your motion so it's clear.
Why would we just want to do the changes? What if there's something we want to revisit as far as, you know, an item we want to revisit in the handbook?
Well, don't you think because it's a handbook and they're reviewing it every year, that they are reviewing it to keep it legal, following whatever?
Not only legal, but what if there's a really rich benefit in there that the administration or doesn't want to change, but yet we feel is necessary that we should be looking at something like that and possibly changing it?
Then when we review benefits at that point in
No,
time.
a
we'll-
benefit, not health and welfare type benefits,
Oh.
not what I'm talking, but a beneficial item in that handbook that's a costly item for the district, and maybe we want to pull some of that back at some point in time.
Okay, I just thought an annual review, maybe we only look at the changes, and every 2 years, 3 years, we go over the whole handbook then. It's just, the whole handbook, if we're gonna go over the whole thing, no, we don't have to go over the whole thing.
We
I'm not
can't-
saying we have to go over the whole, that's what the motion is, we're gonna review it every year, the handbook.
In August is our half an hour meeting before the annual meeting, so I don't see that happening in August.
Yeah.
I don't, I don't expect to see anything in there right now that I'm gonna feel a need to even discuss. It's more of a educational and awareness of, an oversight review of what changes have happened.
Most of the handbook changes I can foreshadow for you for this year are either going to be what I just talked about from Title IX that are required notices. We have absolutely required notices around the new FMLA laws. And then we have obviously expectations for staff as they relate to what you saw with the back to school that have to be amendments to the handbook that will go into that handbook this year. As well as anything else that I might not be thinking of that needs clarification, because sometimes over the year, we get feedback from employees that a particular paragraph maybe doesn't make sense, or the way that something is worded, or our process, for example, of reporting an absence might change. And so we have to change the handbook to make sure that process is laid out for them the way we expect them to follow it.
When you say a handbook review, rather than the board micromanage what our administrators should be doing as far as the handbook, maybe just they change a summary at some meeting. What are the changes what's a summary of all the changes that took place in the handbook or something like that, rather than us doing a formal, again, like I say, micromanage review on what some others are already doing.
So that document's created every year, and it's put in the board docs library. So when it's completed, we should put it on the agenda, and then we can show you that document of what's been changed in the handbook, and then put it in the library. So you see it, and then and Ms. Allyhausen can speak to what those changes are.
And if there was ever anything, and I'm not proposing this, but let's say we want to change the vacation schedule or something like that, or change a holiday. What would our process be to get that changed in the
I think,
handbook?
it's really in the context of talking about the budget more than anything. It's about where we're at in our budget and what goals we're trying to accomplish with our budget. And if you want to take vacation from people to build the budget, it's part of that conversation. It's not in isolation, we're not just going to pick things out of the handbook to cut without. So through the budget process is, I think, where you could propose, if we're in a position where we have to make cuts, that might be one of them. But to just pick things out of the handbook, I don't see that as appropriate. So, but, when the original handbook, when there were changes, like we didn't have the authority to make changes in fiscal things in the handbook. And I respect Ms. Evans' point that this coursework that we used to pay a lot more for and we pay a lot less for was costing the district less, and therefore probably does qualify as a fiscal change. And I respect that she says that should have been the board should have been notified of that. I'll own that. But I think we're landing somewhere where we need to land, which is when we annually make changes to the handbook, that be placed on the agenda for the board to hear about what those are. Might be kind of bored by some of that because it's kind of legal stuff often, but it gives the board a chance to revisit those changes and then just get back into that handbook again if they'd like to. So
Perhaps July is the time to do that when we're going over the budget, rather than August.
I don't know if we have everything we need by that time to make your handbook changes.
Yeah, so the handbook is somewhere between August and October.
Okay.
And it depends what legal pieces might be moving. Because again, I try not to just change the handbook, send out another, hey, sign this, change the handbook. Like, we try really hard to make sure everything's in there for this upcoming school year. Because that's what's fair for employees, right? This is the roadmap of how we expect them to behave predominantly, and then what we provide for them. So with this Title IX piece, there's so much more detail. You could have had me talk for half an hour. There's required training for all staff in here that hasn't been situated yet. And so I'm thinking this year's handbook will probably fall into the month of September. Please remember that the way our handbook's written is, until a new version of it, the handbook that's in place is the governing document. So it doesn't mean that because one's not out, that the rules are off the table. That's not the case. And so it's somewhere in that time frame. When I have that document completed, employees see that document as well, because I do want them to know what's in there. This is a 100+ page document. And so I'd be happy to have that on the agenda so that you see what they see in a much more intentional way than placing it in the library.
So maybe instead of identifying a particular month, have a window of when that would come to the board.
Or prior to being shared with employees, or after, you're sharing with the employees, that's the end point in your year, right? So that, tie it to that, when it becomes available to.
And it is a legal document,
Yes, it is.
so we should probably review it before it's shared with the employees.
Do you want to clarify your motion? And is your motion eliminating the approval of any fiscal items?
Well, they can be taken up at that time. Well, I guess I'd have to,
I would keep that in.
Why do we?
well, I don't even know where it's written, where that is. Is that a policy? How
It was part of the motion when
Part
the
of the-
handbook was approved.
The original motion?
Yeah, it was a part of the original motion. So I think your motion could be, in addition to bringing the handbook for any fiscal changes, the changes to the handbook will be reviewed by the board every fall. To your point, it should be a window of time.
Perfect, what she said.
You made the second, is that fine with you?
Yes.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Next, we have item 10B, Personnel and Policy, Policy 1111, Release of Public Records and Property. Dr. Miller.
This policy was last reviewed in 2014, so it's time to take a look at this. I did have our legal counsel take a look at it, and the recommended changes to this policy pertain to adding more specificity around what a record actually is, and what the requester needs to make clear in the request. So more language is in here about that. And then an update to what we charge for the record. So those would be the primary changes to the policy. I'll answer any questions you might have about it.
Any questions?
What's the cost? I can't quite. 15 cents per black and white copy?
Yeah, it was originally,
10 cents?
it was higher. It's reduced.
Well, it was 25 cents for the first copy and then 10 cents. But our legal counsel advised that, I wrote it down, costs need to be actual, direct, and necessary. So that splitting the price is not what would be considered actual or necessary. It's not actual and necessary to charge 25 cents for the first copy and then 10 cents for the second. So he said lose that language.
The actual cost can't possibly be 15 cents for a copy.
So, you
Each
know, we do
page
have
should
to
be-
maintain
each
the
page.
equipment that we use to create copies.
In staff
You
time?
can get a maintenance contract for like a penny a copy,
no.
and then when you add paper and everything else to it, you're looking at a couple
But
cents.
how about the person's time
Yeah,
who's
person's time,
copying
yeah.
too?
Actual cost. And the next line talks about the actual direct and necessary time spent by clerical employees may be charged. So that's where you're adding that in already. So 15 cents for just the copy is substantially more than actual cost.
So we were at 10 cents, and I modified this policy to say 15.
I mean-
Potentially, it could go back to 10 cents. I think Mr. Milzer would certainly support that, but going below that, it just doesn't seem consistent with other policies and what was charged. And then I might just add that many requesters now request these documents digitally. So we're not often even making paper copies of documents anymore. So they avoid all those costs by saying, I want this information digitally, and we must provide it that way. So, Mr. Milzer, I hate to put you on the spot, but you and I, unfortunately, I did not connect with you again. Would you like that number to be 15 cents or 10 cents?
I think 10 cents would be fine.
10 cents. So when we approve this, if we have a motion, it would be the change to 10 cents. I apologize for not updating that.
Because what's new in this policy is, to your point, the actual and direct necessary time for staff. That wasn't there before.
Right, the
Correct.
actual direct and necessary time spent is.
Was not there before.
No. Mm-mm.
So that's why it was more baked into the,
So even if they take it electronically, they'll still get charged for the actual time of the clerical person putting everything together and scanning it in,
Well,
et cetera.
They're charged for like location, like even trying to locate documents.
Right.
So,
So
yeah.
the time and,
time.
Time and effort.
time and effort, right.
There may
Depending.
be something in the law that puts a minimum on that, though?
Yeah, it
That it has to
does.
exceed $50?
Right, $50. It's locating fees. There will be no locating fees imposed upon any person who requests a record if the cost of locating that record is less than $50. So
Okay.
that's written in here. But that will go back to 10 cents, not 15. I don't know, I was remembering my college days. I think I wasn't paying a penny to copy something. I think I was paying a dime to copy something.
No, but if you go into some copy place, they're gonna charge you because they're looking to make a profit on it. But when you said this needs to be the actual cost,
I see.
I just know an actual cost of a copy isn't anywhere near 15, not close to 10 either. So put any number you want in there if we're not trying to really hit an actual cost. But that's gonna be your actual cost if that's what you want, yeah.
So I'm looking for a motion to approve revised policy 1111 with the change to 10 cents a copy.
So moved.
Thank you.
Motion by Mr. Lewis, is there a second?
second.
Second by Mrs. Witkowski. Any other discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Item 10C, Board Liaison Reports. Do we have any reports? I'd just like to say that Mr. Sprague and I did attend the graduation diploma handouts today. There's several days of those, and Dr. Miller stopped in, and it was very nice. There were a lot of compliments from the families, thanking the district for doing that, and there were a couple emotional times that grandparents. Yeah, it was very nice, so it worked out well. Item 11, School Board Meeting Debriefing. Any comments? No, okay.
Just
I
want to
just
say,
wanna- wait.
there's good work done on all your
Yeah.
planning
Yeah.
for back to school. Yes, fully support it.
I also want to say that I know Jim worked hard on getting answers back on the budget, but I think we can do that differently and better if we could get some of that information incorporated into a better briefing document up front. And I know, Janet, you suggested I could bring that forward at the August meeting, and I think I will proceed to do that. And I'll work with Judy and yourself.
You mean to make a motion?
No, at the retreat? Are you talking about the retreat? in
No, you
August?
had said, I thought at the August board meeting, or you suggested.
No, what I'm suggesting is if you want to bring forward to make changes to the budget for next, it has to be for next year, you have to get approval from the board and bring forward what you're proposing. You know, if you want to ask Mr. Milzer to make changes to the budget, as one board member, you can't do that alone. You have to bring your
Right.
proposal. You have to
Correct.
say, if you want it as an agenda item, you have to
Right.
say, I'd like to make a motion to talk about the budget. And you're right, we couldn't do it at the August meeting. So you can say at a future, what meeting you'd like to suggest it. But the board has to be on board with making those changes. And you can present your case, yeah, what you'd like to have changed. So yes, you can ask the board if they're on board with doing that. A motion and a second, so, and a vote.
At a future meeting.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think tonight, if you wanted to make that motion, if you have a case to make, to get, tonight to do it, I don't know if you're prepared.
No.
Okay, so you can do that at another meeting. So, sure. Okay. Future agenda items, item 12. Coherence plan presentation on September 9th, 2020, and the summer school report, September 9th, 2020. And then I'm looking for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Okay.
Second.
Mr. Gamble, and a second by Mrs. Witkowski. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned at 8:43.